بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Assalamu alaikum wa barakatuh. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to QU Dentist Student Research Program. First, let me introduce myself. My name is Mohammed Mshaiti. I will be responsible for hosting this presentation today. And I'm glad to welcome Dr. Nabil Mutairi, who will present essential tips in research writing and journal selection. Dr. Nabil has a bachelor degree of dentistry, a master degree in orthodontist, and PhD. Also, he is a member of orthodontic and pediatric dentistry at College of Dentistry at Qasim University. Before we get started, please keep your mic muted during the presentation. Also, at the end of the presentation, you can ask your question at the chat panel, or you can click on the raise hands button to ask your question directly. The webinar will be recorded and will be shared with those who have registered, and everyone will have the access. We'd like to know that all the audience are Arabic speakers, so Dr. Nabil can clarify some point during the presentation in Arabic. So if there are any non-Arabic speaker, please raise your hand. Okay. Okay, now Dr. Nabil, you can start your our lovely evening show.
Okay, thank you so much for the introduction. Can you give me the sharing?
Yeah, sure.
Do you see the presentation?
Yeah.
Is it clear?
Yes, it's clear.
Okay. Okay, first of all, thank you so much for the invitation to give this lecture. It will be about essential tips in research writing and journal selection. I remember, I think in October, Dr. Mohammed Al-Khudari, he gave you already like a presentation about how to write research articles. In the first section, I'll just go through some summary about research writing. And then the later stage of the presentation, I will present some practical tips in selecting the journals. Okay, so about research writing, usually the anatomy of scientific articles follow the IMRD structure, which refer to first introduction, and then Mateen method section, and then the result section, and finally the discussion. For the introduction section, usually the researchers, they tell the readers what they are studying in their article and why it's important to study the topic. And usually they write the aim and the hypothesis at the end of the introduction, and usually they present a well-balanced literature review. So the introduction follows the funnel method. What we mean by funnel method, you first start generally by having an introductory paragraph that could introduce the topic. For example, having a definition of the topic, maybe a history or prevalence. And then you go on to write a summary of the studies that have explored the topic, the studies that present either agree what we are aiming to study or disagree with that. And then finally, you report the knowledge gap and the paper aims and the hypothesis. But always remember when you write the introduction not to keep it too long. Usually, I think most journals follow the 500-word limit. And then after that, you move on to the Mateen method section. In the Mateen method section, you write the study design. I think you know already what the study designs. You have retrospective, prospective, case reports, etc. And then you write about the sample of your study. If you have, for example, humans, you write their age and size. I mean by the size is the number of the sample. And also, if it was randomized clinical trial, you report also how you did the randomization process in your study. And it's also important to justify the selection of the sample that you have chosen in your study by presenting a power analysis. This is really requested all the time when you submit your articles. And also, if you have multiple groups, you could write about the grouping in your study. And then also it's preferable if you could write the study location and also the inclusion and exclusion criteria of your sample. And always remember, I think this is the common sense when you do a research project in universities. Before you start, you have to have ethical permit. And also when you have a human subject, you have to have informed consent for each subject. And these informations, you have to write it in the material methods sections.
دكتور نبيل بعد إذنك.
أيوة.
السدات عندنا ما تتحرك.
ثابت على أي سلايد حاليا؟
الأولى.
غريب، ثاني بس ما أدري. أوكي ثاني. أعتقد لازم أشارك العرض السلايدات أو لا؟
تمام إيه.
بس إشكالية حاليا ما طلع لي شيء ثاني. شوف هنا. كيف الحين واضحة ولا؟
تمام واضح دكتور، حرك بس عشان نشوف. تمام.
ممتاز. آسف جدا للخلل هذا، ما صراحة أول مرة أجرب البرنامج هذا، وهذه مشكلتكم أنتم. ليش ما جربتوا زوم يا شباب؟
لا معذور دكتور.
طيب زي ما قلنا في البداية إنه scientific articles they follow the IMRD structure. The I refer to the introduction, and the M refer to the material methods, and the R refer to the result section, and finally the D refer to the discussion section. In the introduction, you tell the reader what you have studied and why it's important that you have studied this topic. And also you write about the aim and the hypothesis of your study, and also you report some well-balanced literature review. So most introduction sections, they follow the funnel method. What we mean by the funnel method, you start generally by having introductory paragraph that introduce the topic by presenting a definition, a history, a prevalence, and then you go on by writing up-to-date summary of the studies related to the topic, but make sure that you present the study that agree or disagree with what you are aiming to study. And finally, you report the knowledge gap of your paper by writing the paper aims and the hypothesis. And try to make it as short as possible. I think most journals follow the 500-word limit. I think there's some journals, they have more longer introduction, but try to keep it for your behavior, try to keep it as short as possible. Then when you move on to the material method section, you write the study design. As we said, there is multiple designs of the study, so you have to be specific what type of study that you have conducting. And then also you write the study sample that you are recruiting for your study. For example, if you have humans, you could write the age of the participants and the number of the participants. And if it was randomized clinical trial, you could report how you did the randomization process. And I think most journals now, they require that you have a power analysis statement to justify the number of the participant that you have chosen in your study. And also if you have multiple groups, you should write information about that. Okay, and then also you could write the study location. For example, the sample was recruited from dental clinic at Qasim University, Saudi Arabia, for example. And then also you could write the inclusion and exclusion criteria that you applied for your sample. And I think most research projects nowadays, they are performed after the receipt of ethical permit. Then you have to write the ethical permit number and the issuing authority and the informed consent that you have obtained from the human participants in your material method section. And then you move on by writing the experimental methods that you have used in your study, and also the type of data that you have collected from your participants or from animal samples, for example. And then also the type of statistics. I think it's really important to report the data normality of your data. If it's not normally distributed, then you have to do some steps, or maybe you have to choose some certain type of statistical analysis. And then also you could report reliability and validity of your data. And then also write the p-value limit. And sometimes if you have complex experiments, it's really advised if you could have illustrations that represent your method that you have used in your study. And also sometimes it's advisable to have subheadings in the material methods, just to make it more organized and easier to read. And then you move on to the result section. In the result section, you just simply state what you have found, and there is no interpretation. The interpretation will be the next section for the discussion section. And then in the result section, I think most researchers usually, when they write the result section, they start by having a descriptive paragraph by writing about the sample number, or maybe the attrition rate, or the gender of the sample, for example. And then you move on by writing the result that you have obtained in your study. And also you could use some tables and figures. And it's important that you don't repeat all the informations that you have in the tables on the text. And it's also important that you could report the most relevant results. And also it's important that you have to report the statistical results by having the p-value, f-value, or other type of statistics. And it's also important, I see this a lot, that you have, for example, two groups, and then you write, okay, group one was higher than other group. Okay, if it's not statistically significant, then there is no difference actually. So this statement will not be correct. So make sure that when you write a difference, it should be statistically correct. So for the figures, it's really important that you have to keep it simple. And it's important also to use the X and Y axis titles with the units, and use a legend for multiple figures. And it's also important to avoid chart junk. What we mean by the chart junk is like the 3D effects, or the coloring, like excessive coloring with the figures. So for example, if you see this figure, it has the 3D effect. When you try to see the lines and what's the data mean, for example, is it here or is it there? It's a bit confusing for the readers. And also there is another problem for this figure. If you see closely, and if you transfer to 2D, it will be much more easy to read. But there is a problem for these two figures, that they are starting from not from zero, they are starting from higher number. And this gives the illusion that there is some differences between the measurements. So if you see this one, there is a big difference. But when you try to change the figure and start from zero, you'll see the difference is almost non-existent. So it's always important that when you try to have a figure, do not truncate it. But if you want to truncate the figure, try to use such symbols to just let the readers understand that there is some truncation in the figure. Okay, now the discussion section. Here you interpret or describe the significance of your findings in an evidence-based manner. And it's important that you don't repeat the result, but discuss their importance in filling the knowledge gap. And try to be concise and follow a logical line of thoughts. And do not discredit other studies or authors. Just try to criticize the studies in really professional manner. And it's important to discuss in a humble and reasonable way. And remember, this is the most important and difficult section of the research paper. So how the structure of discussion? Usually discussion follow the inverted funnel, the opposite as the introduction. You start by reporting your study aim and the major findings that you have found. And then you move on by trying to illustrate how is your data are important and how they are related to other studies in the field. And then you try to generalize by reporting how they are important in the field or research or mankind. And then you could discuss the strength and limitation of the paper. And then finally, you could suggest some research ideas or improvement for your ideas. And then you move on to the conclusion section. And this is probably the most easier section in the research paper. You report or write the major results that you have found and the clinical implications of those results. And then you write the abstract. The abstract, usually you write it at the end, because at the end you'll know each section, what it contains. It is a quick summary of the study, and it is usually between 200 and 300 words. And it's the structure. First, you report the objectives of the study and the methods that you have applied in the study, and some major results, and the conclusions of your study. And it's important to remember that there is no references in the abstract, and it should agree with what you have wrote in the paper. That's really important. And some journals require a background or clinical relevance section in the abstract section. Now, this is really important. The keywords, sometimes they are forgotten. And the importance of keywords that they are will make your article more accessible or easily found by other researchers. And they should be effective, and they should reflect the paper content. Usually, the keywords, you could select them like a key terms from your paper, but I think it's easier if you could select niche terms. There is a website called Mish On Demand. You could just copy your abstract and then hit search, and it will highlight the niche terms that are available in your abstract. So you could select like 5 or 6 among them, and you could add it to your paper. But it's also important that you choose words that are not present in your title, because the words that are present in your title will be searchable. So it's important to add more words that could be make your article more accessible. And it's also important to select the keywords carefully, because some terms will make your article difficult to find because they are overgeneralized, and there are some terms that are really specific. So you will have difficulty that you will have a lot of filtering of other studies. So try to choose them carefully. Now, finally, the title. It highlights the importance of your paper, and it attracts the reader attention, and should be informative and concise. And it's important to avoid abbreviations, and also not to have it too long or too short. So the general advice for research writing, it's important to choose a topic that you like, because you will excel more if you have a topic that you are interested in. And also use headlines when you are writing, because while you are writing, the writing will take a long time. So it's really important to have some headlines that they will guide your thoughts while writing. And also it's important to build a writing routine. For example, having like 2 hours per day. And during these 2 hours, you try to avoid distractions. And once you are did really a good job and you are really satisfied, you could reward your hard work by doing something that you enjoy. And it's really important to use a reference management program at an early stage of your writing, because I saw some researchers that they use manual referencing, and then at the end they will replace it with their EndNote or Mendeley programs. That's really a bit difficult, I think. So I think it's good to have it at the start of your writing. And it's really important that when you write, try to select references from legitimate journals. That's really important for your reputations and for your successfulness in accepting your paper in different journals. And it's really important that you don't really be discouraged, because at the first stage of your writing, you will not be having an excellent paper, but with time, it will improve and mature more. So expect that. And it's important that if you have any question or some things that you don't understand, you could seek an advice from a senior or experienced colleagues. Okay, now we finished from the academic writing. Now we could start with the journal selection tips. If you do a quick search in medicine and health journals, you'll find like there is around like 80,000 journals. So the selection of a specific journal that fit for your study is a bit difficult. So there is some practical tips when you try to select a journal. I think the easiest one among them is by going through your reference list and try to find the most journal that has appeared in your reference list. And this journal should be, I think, the target when you try to submit a paper. If this was not possible, You could select title or manuscript matching websites. There are a lot of types of website, but the most common one is Jane. And there is also Journal Guides and Midsum, and also Web of Science Master Journals list. They have a service called Manuscript Matching, but you have to have a username and password to search for journals. But the problem with but there are also another websites that also they present other journals. But the problem with these websites that they are selective. So you will have only journals that are present in those journals, in those websites. So you have to be careful. So I think, my honest opinion, I think if you use Jane or Midsum will be enough for you. And you could do like a hand search using subject categories. For example, if you go through Web of Science, you could do you could search the dentistry category, and you could find that there is 91 journals that you could select from. Or you could go through the Scopus website by doing the same. You just search the dentistry category, and you could find like 252 journals. And you could do the same thing with the SGR website. You'll have around this number also. If you are not satisfied, but you have selected your journal, you could check this if the journal is indexed in major databases. I think the best website that you could use to check the indexing for journal called OryxWebs. In this website, you could search the journal name, and it will give you exact indexing for each journal. But the problem with this website that it has subscription, so I don't think المكتبة السعودية الرقمية ما أتوقع عندهم الاشتراك للأسف. لكن I think we have different tips that we could help in verifying the indexing of a journal. You could do it manually by going through the journal website, by going through the abstracting or indexing headlines, and you could go through there and you could check at which database that they were indexed. And also you could confirm the date or the information that's presented in the journal website by going through, for example, PubMed. They have a catalog for journals. You could go there and search for the journal that you have selected. Or you could go through Web of Science, or through, but also you could sometimes in the journal list, it shows all the journals that have indexed on Web of Science, but not all journals indexed on Web of Science have impact factor. To verify if they have impact factor, you have to go to Clarivat Analytics. And also, if you want to verify if the journal is indexed in Scopus, you could go through Schemago journal and country rank. And also, it's important when you try to select a journal to verify if the scope of the journal is fitting your paper, to avoid rejecting your paper. But you have to really know that there are different journals that could accept wide disciplines. Such example, clinical or investigations, for example, they accept from different disciplines, and also odontology and European Journal of Oral Sciences. And also one factor, as we said, the impact factor of the journal, but you have to remember that the impact factor could be checked from this website, but it's only a measure of the journal influence, but it doesn't mean that the articles in the journals will be high quality. And also one factor when you try to select a journal is the average duration of the review process. You could check that by going to a website called SciRev. You could write the name of the journal, and you could get a report from actual authors that have submitted to the journal. This will give you a nice idea about the journal, how long it will take when you submit an article before the first review is received by you. And also one important factor is, does the journal have an online submission system? Because some journals, I think they allow manuscript to be submitted through their email addresses. This is a bit difficult to track, so I think it's important that when you submit a journal, make sure that they have online submission system. And also one factor, if the journal is open access or not. I think open access journals are good because they offer more accessibility for your articles, and then maybe you will have more citations. But it's also important to check the cost of the publication because sometimes they're really costly. And you could do that by going through the Doja. You could write the journal name and you could search. And then you could see the amount of money that they request for publishing your article. But be careful. There are also open access journals, but they are fake journals. So you have to be careful about that. What the features of fake journals? Fake journals, as we said, they are open access, all of them, but they request publication charges and they have no peer review at all. They only care about the publication charges. It's like a money generating scheme. And also usually they have emailing campaigns. So if you publish an article, you will check your junk mail that you have a lot of email that have been sent from these journals. Try to avoid them. And usually they are not indexed in major databases, but they sometimes in their websites, they write that they have impact factor or they have indexed in PubMed or any other database. So you have to make sure that you have to check that before submitting to these journals. And sometimes they name the journal to be similar to other well-known journals to make it difficult for the authors to distinguish between the journals. So for example, these journals, the first one and the left one called Orthodontic and Craniofacial Research, and the right one called Journal of Orthodontics and Craniofacial Research. So the difference between the two journals that they add these two words at the first. But this one is a fake journal and this one is a legitimate journal. So you have to be careful about that. So if you go through this journal's website, you'll find that they have, the design is a bit non-professional. They have like WhatsApp number and they have, it's like not really a professional journals. And then also when you try to check the abstract and indexes, they have wrote some information, but you have to really confirm it. But also when they accept articles, they accept from really, really wide disciplines. Although the journal is orthodontics, they accept from different disciplines, for example, endodontics and other disciplines that are not really totally related to orthodontics. And the address of the journals, it's funny that they are in a villa in the United States, which is really shows you the amount of dishonesty in these journals. So you have to be careful when you try to submit your article. I think the best way to check if the journal is fake or not, you could follow the Think, Check, Submit guidelines. These guidelines have different questions. If you manage to answer all the questions by yes, so this journal will be eligible. If you can't really answer all the questions by yes, I think it's good to avoid the journal. So the general advice when trying to select a journal, always remember to aim high. And you could prepare a list of 3 to 4 candidate journals because maybe you will get rejected from the first paper. You could have another journal ready to be submitted to. But it's important not to submit to multiple journals at one time. And also prepare your manuscript according to the journal's requirement, because if you don't manage to do that, usually you'll get at least a quality check that you have to format your manuscript according to the requirements, or maybe you get rejection. So I think to avoid wasting your time, I think you could prepare it before you submit. And also it's important to make sure that your manuscript is of sufficient English and sufficient quality. You could do that by submit it to English editing website, or maybe you could give it to a senior researcher that could read it and tell you the drawbacks in your research. And also it's important to double check for plagiarism. You could do that by using Authenticate website, for example. That's really, really important before you submit. And some journals, they require that you have 2 to 3 reviewers before submitting to them. So you could prepare a list from these reviewers. You could use Jane. You remember the Jane that we have discussed about manuscript matching? They also offer author search. So you could copy your abstract and you could hit author finding or something like that. And then you could find the names of the authors that have commonly studied the same topic. So you could choose them from there. And usually it's very difficult to submit to papers and follow them. So you have to be really patient. And always remember that there are more than 200 dental journals. So don't be desperate. So you try to aim high when you try to submit journals and have multiple lists. And hopefully you will get really decent journal to be accepted in your paper. And finally, keep your country's reputation in your mind, because it's not only your paper that you published. You are a reflection of the country. So you are from Saudi Arabia. If you publish in the fake journals, this will affect the reputation. I think this is happening now in India. In India now, I think they have a lot of fake journals, and most journals, they are not aware of that, and they publish in those journals. And this affected the reputation of the country. So be careful about that. Thank you so much. I hope I gave you a quick summary of how to write and submit your paper. If you have any other questions, you could email me, or you could contact me through my Twitter account.